Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's not always particularly comfortable to be a rabbi when questioned by the media. For at that moment, the rabbi is expected to be an expert not only of Torah, but all things Jewish, and now including military operations and the inner workings of Israeli politics. And yet I think in some ways it's one of the tensions that we feel as Jews in the diaspora. For we are so deeply tied, not just to Judaism and Torah, but to the national conversation and the ideology of our people. And I was thinking about that in particular as I sat here, and all morning I'm seeing your faces, but also looking at those chairs and the Israeli flag standing there proudly in the back. This past week I was called by a local television station to do a short Zoom interview where I was asked about the pause in the fighting and what my thoughts were about that. Did I hope that the pause would continue? It brought into clear focus the balance that's necessary between those negotiations for the release of hostages and the necessity to defend our state and our borders and the effort to destroy Hamas's infrastructure, Hamas's military infrastructure. And so I addressed it in those terms, and I spoke about how complex that is for a people who hold on to the value of human life, but a people also who understand the need for its autonomy, the need for our own state, the need to protect our citizens. Israel is at war, and the war effort needs to be compromised, had to be compromised to save lives. And this points to the very challenge of the Jewish state. For there is, in fact, great consideration given to the lives of individuals, all individuals. And this is reflected in many ways, not just in relation to the negotiation for hostages, but also the methodologies used by the IDF to fight this war. I want to bring you back to 1982. That was my first year as a rabbi. I was a freshman rabbi, as it were, in a small town in the Midwest. And when I arrived, coincided with the first Israeli incursion into southern Lebanon. Remember that war, it was a defensive war. And after the first or second week in my position, I was called by the local newspaper. And I was asked, what do I think about the war that's taking place? I had no experience speaking with the press as a public figure at that time in my career. And I vividly recall saying to them that wars are awful, but sometimes wars are necessary. And we have a tradition that reflects that. Sometimes wars have to be fought for the defense of the sovereignty of a nation. And because of the massive military buildup in southern Lebanon, I supported Israel's actions. Well, the following Friday in the weekly religion section, the headline read, "New Rabbi Supports War." It didn't say the war, it said new rabbi supports war. I knew that I was not off to a good start in making a lot of local friends in the clergy, but I certainly learned a lesson about the press and its responsibility and the headlines that we view in the newspapers. And so I have always read headlines with great care. We're in a difficult situation, and all of us know it. We're sharing the terrible sadness and the anger and the angst that's coming from Israel. For me, this hit home personally last week, and I know for many of you it's personal. but good friends who served on the Mishlachat at Camp Ramah years ago when I was working there also, who had 4 children, had their youngest sons in Gaza, and he lost his leg. The world is crazy. It appears rudderless in terms of life's most important values. It appears incapable of making distinctions between rapists, terrorists, and those who wish to protect themselves against their nihilism. We hear conversations about war crimes and genocide with the loudest voices so misinformed. And the news coming from the, quote, Hamas Health Ministry, for many is news which is assumed to be true. And already so many of these reports have been shown to be lies. I think you join me when I say that I could cry. Cry for those who are still held hostage and the horrific pain their families are going through. For the innocent people, both Israelis and Palestinians, who've been pulled into the war by the evil jihadists. And I'm so angry about the ease at which a terrorist gang of thugs was able to control a narrative and manipulate the responses of the world. But that's a story for another time. And I have learned actually years ago, but now have gotten close to an organization that's working with the information on campuses, and have learned that over $11 billion has been spent at our leading universities to support chairs of departments and chairs for professors who manifest a narrative about Palestinian liberation and Israeli oppression. Well, those thugs, however, are responsible not only for the 1,400 precious souls who died in the south of Israel, they're also responsible for the death of their own, often innocent and precious children. I guess for my own sanity, I'm compelled to share a lot of these feelings again, and probably will again and again. I mean, we do have to talk about those things which are disturbing. At this moment, however, as a rabbi, I prefer not to be a pundit or an analyst who knows any more than the average person or any of you above average people who are sitting here. You're all very well read, I know that. But I prefer to turn to a different conversation. I try to see what we can glean from Torah. And it's not a gleaning that then reflects policy, but it's a gleaning that informs values. The Eitz Chaim, this tree of life, is the place I constantly wish to climb. I turn there not for specific definitions or insight into today's battles, but rather for the inherent values that we derive. And now I will admit to you that I am a bit of a triumphalist. I believe that we have created a culture and given to humanity so immensely in all different arenas of human life that not only advances people and their health and their understanding in all fields, but we've also helped provide a system of values that has created a worldview and a structure whereby there is a law that guides moral behavior and ethics. There's a reason that we in so much of the Western world have guidelines for fighting war ethically. It seems like a contradiction in terms, but it is not. Both the American Army and the IDF make distinctions between combatants and non-combatants. Israel has attempted to do this to the best it can in order to defeat Hamas and to fight, and so they have fought with constraints. But that very morality is often used against us. We saw the agonizing decision to withhold fire for the sake of hostages, even knowing that it gives the enemy the chance to reload and to find better ways for them to re-enter their war. I I believe that Israel will be victorious because we have to be, because there is no option. We have no choice. Survival is our cause. So let me reflect on a few parts of the story in this week's Parsha so we can look a little bit at some of the values implied. And the first part has to do with the wrestling of Jacob and his adversary. 22 years ago, my then 13-year-old son Noah stood on this bima as a bar mitzvah. He gave one of the best bar mitzvah speeches in history. And if you remember Noah at that time, he was this little guy that had to stand on about 3 boxes. He did prepare his speech by himself. I just provided him with commentary and sources. And so the question asked about the wrestling with Jacob and his adversary was the question he dealt with. And the question asked was, who was that adversary? Who was that opponent? And we've looked at this and we've spoken about it for years. And the commentaries say perhaps it was a manifestation of God. It was an angel of God. They say perhaps it was Esau himself. We don't know. But then there's a commentary that suggested, and this is why I quote my son from 22 years ago. I could still quote him, by the way. Before entering into the confrontation with his brother Esau, Jacob had to first battle with himself. And the text begins by indicating to the reader that Jacob was alone. He was alone. He was only able to look at his own spirit, his own heart, consider his own thoughts. The fight within ourselves is always necessary for us as individuals and even as a people to gain some clarity as to who we are, what we're made of, what are our values, and where do we want to go. And Israel clearly has an internal battle taking place. And that internal battle has been going on for quite a while. And although Israel and we are really united in the need for Israel to do what it needs to do to defend herself, there is a battle taking place that was very clear before the war broke out and continues to be spoken about under the surface. It's a battle between democratic forces and Rodfei Shalom, those who pursue peace, against theological messianists. And those of you who are with us on Kol Nidre know that I addressed that. Those who are anti-democracy and those who cannot tolerate others. It's an internal fight, and truth be told, the resolution of today's war will depend to some degree on the resolution of that battle. We have outside enemies that we need to fight. And we have to look at what we have been doing and who we are. So Jacob emerged from that battle as a changed man. He could no longer continue to run. He had to confront his brother. But now he did it with greater insight and greater foresight. Jacob now finds himself about to confront his brother Esau. Esau, whom he had deceived, whom he had stolen from, whom he had run away from because he thought that Esau might kill him. And this is what I mentioned yesterday in my recording. The Torah describes Jacob's emotional state in a different way, and it appears quite strange. Using somewhat redundant language, the text says, Vayira Yaakov ma'od, Vayetzer lo. And the translation that we have in Eitz Chaim in front of us says, and Jacob was very fearful and filled with anxiety. Why the use of this dual terminology of he was fearful and he was anxious? And the commentaries from the Midrash, and Rashi brings it also, say that Jacob was fearful because he was afraid that he or members of his family would be murdered. But he was also anxious that he or the members of his family could become murderers and the impact of that upon them. He's not only fearful of his own life and that of his family, he is in that very moment deeply concerned about the prospect of killing others and what violence can do to the soul of man. Now, I am in no way, as you could tell from the things that I've been saying over the years, I am not a pacifist, but I am concerned about the human spirit. I am concerned about the Jewish neshama. And I don't say this as a critique. I say it as a desire for us to be sensitized to what life brings us and how we respond and then what we do with that response. So there's a delicate balance. The oppressed, we know throughout history, when given strength and power, can easily become the oppressor. We're seeing that in many ways. We are both victimized and we have at times been victimizers. And that is where the ethical use of power is called for. This war cannot continue forever. It won't result in their loss and our win. It won't. We know that it's not. If we think that is the way it will end, then the war is going to go on forever and it will swallow all of us up. And so there's a contradiction that we have to look at. We need to have power in order to limit power. We need to have control in order to limit control. It sounds so contradictory, and that's our dilemma. Ultimately, at the end of all this, after the current military goals of the destruction of this Hamas infrastructure, great changes are going to have to occur. We will not accept being killed. But we also know that when we are killers, it impacts us. And so it's part of our learning and our understanding and the deepening of our spirits and souls and what we as a Jewish people have to come to terms with. Because until 75 years ago, we had no power. So now we do have power because Israel is really strong. And we're going to figure out how to use it to the best way possible for our survival and to model something for the world. So can the Torah give us insight on how we get there? And here's my other thought from the Parsha. The book of Genesis is full of violent stories. Stories of violence within families. It begins with a brother killing a brother. But there's a few stories about reconciliation in Genesis, although they're quite rare. And that's why this week's Torah portion is an unusual exception. For Joseph and his brothers is the other one that comes to mind, but today there's a reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. It's a pretty inspiring story, actually. Jacob sees Esau coming accompanied by 400 men, and he is afraid. He divides the children among his two wives and prepares for the absolute worst. And then he goes to greet Esau. He bows before his brother Esau 7 times out of fear and out of respect. And then all of a sudden, we're surprised by this moment in the encounter where it says, Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they cried. The Hebrew word for he kissed him, if you noticed in the Parsha, is marked with 4 asterisks above the word, 4 nikudot. And it's and that's not just in our Bibles, it's been in the Torah. And it's led classical commentators to offer various interpretation to this puzzling text. Was Esau kissing him genuinely? Do you think he really meant it? Was his purpose in coming to meet his estranged brother to repair their relationship after so many years to continue deception? Don't know. There's a difference of opinion in the matter. Some interpret the asterisk to mean that Esau didn't kiss him wholeheartedly. In the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, "It is well known that Esau hated Jacob. However, there was a moment, and the moment was when his compassion was moved, and he did kiss his brother wholeheartedly. He wanted to reunite with Jacob." In the famous Midrash, Avot de Rabbi Natan, issue is taken with the interpretation. In that Midrash, it says, everything Esau ever did was motivated by hatred, except for this one occasion. And this one time, he was motivated by love. So was the embrace and the kiss genuine or not? Was this a real moment of brotherly reconciliation? Is it really possible to take place after so many years of enmity? Could it have led to a new relationship between the brothers? You know the name of Samson Raphael Hirsch? He was a 19th century German rabbi. He authored an interesting commentary on the Torah. He said this: "The kiss and these tears show us that Esau was also a descendant of Abraham. In Esau, there must have been something more than just the wild hunter. Otherwise, how could he have had the ability to domineer the whole development of humankind?" That's what Rabbi Hirsch said. He dominated the development of humankind because Esau was seen as being the father of Edom and the father of Rome, and ultimately it dominated human culture. The sword alone, he said, simply raw force is not able to do that. But Esau also gradually laid the sword down, gradually more and more towards humanity. And it's just Jacob on whom Esau has the opportunity to show that, and how the principles of humaneness began to affect him. When the strong respect the rights of the strong, it's just wisdom. It's only when the strong, as here Esau, falls around the neck of the weak and casts the sword of violence away, it's only then does it show that right and humaneness may have the possibility to win. We see that the reconciliation between Jacob and Esau was only a momentary event, but could it have worked for a longer time? And I ask the question, and I engage in the text with the sense of uncertainty. I simply don't know. And I know some of you are certain that it's impossible. I know some of you feel that with all your hearts. And I know that many of you have had the experiences which allow you to say that. In our own contemporary situation, who is Jacob and who is Esau? Who is strong and who is weak? It sure seemed like we were the strong partners here, but we were not able to use our strength properly. Maybe we're both strong, and maybe we're both weak in different ways, but at the same time. In the biblical story, Jacob and Esau go their separate ways. Separation became the way to move ahead. I'm not sure if separation is the same as peace. Separation and building walls and fences may be a way to create ceasefires and protect yourselves. Some people reference that as coexistence. Each group just has to live separately. And that, in fact, may be the answer, at least for the next generation. It may be the answer for the next century. Fences and walls will need to be built and constantly guarded. As long as you don't shoot missiles at us or attack us in other ways, you can live over there, live in Gaza, on the West Bank, or wherever. We have to live our separate lives. We need to divorce. And probably it's not so realistic right now because we tried it and it didn't work. It's pretty confusing. In modern history, though, we have witnessed some remarkable processes of reconciliation. South Africa, although it's not very tidy. Ireland, although it's constantly being challenged. And just about everyone sitting in this room had a glimpse at reconciliation when President Anwar Sadat visited Jerusalem and gave that speech at the Knesset. And his initiative to establish peace with Israel that took place in 1977. Those actions, as you know, led to the Camp David Accords of 78 and a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, which is iffy, but it holds. And it was signed by Prime Minister Begin, President Sadat, and President Carter. That peace accord ended many years of war. And it's lasted for all those years. So at this moment, we are very far from peace. It's only security that we desire. Did I learn anything from these texts that I presented? I don't know. It made me ask a lot of questions. It gave me what to talk about and want you to ask these questions also. And I say with clarity that we should and can never be naive. We can never compromise on the need to protect ourselves and our own lives. So we pray for strength. But as we pray for strength, we also know we pray for peace. Adonai oz li'amo yitein Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. So let's remember 2 things from this week's reading. Although we fear being killed, we also will need to be concerned about what it means to be a killer. And it's also a warning about power, justice, and ethics. And the second thing to remember about the text has to do with Esau kissing his brother. Sometimes in the world, the unexpected happens. Sometimes in our lives, that thing which we never thought would happen, happens. Sometimes paradigms shift, and new opportunities do arise. Sometimes after the darkest night, every time after the darkest night, rays of light do occur. Maybe it's naive, but the option to it is despair. And I'm not ready to sign up with despair. I continue to sign myself up with hope. Shabbat Shalom.